The sun had barely risen over the small village, but Amina was already awake. She moved quietly so as not to wake her 3 children, who were still sleeping on thin mats in the small, crumbling hut they called home. Her youngest, a boy of 4, stirred in his sleep, his small stomach growling even before he opened his eyes. Amina's heart ached at the sound. She had no milk to give him, no food prepared. All that remained were the few dry grains she had managed to save from the previous week, barely enough to fill 1 bowl. The village was silent, except for the faint crow of a rooster in the distance and the soft rustle of wind through the dry trees. The fields that once fed the families now lay barren, cracked by months without rain. Amina looked out through the narrow window of her hut and saw other villagers starting their day. Some were tending to empty gardens, hoping for a miracle. Others sat idly, their faces drawn with worry and fatigue. Hunger had become a silent, constant companion in the village. Amina's husband had died many years ago, leaving her to care for their children alone. At first, she had hoped that relatives might help, but poverty had touched every family in the village. There were no neighbors with extra food, no friends with spare coins. Every day was a struggle. A careful calculation of how much each child could eat, how long a small amount of grain might last. She often went without, hiding her own hunger so her children could eat a little more. That morning, as she watched her children stir awake, Amina felt a surge of determination. She had always been a quiet woman, respectful of others, never bold enough to demand anything. But desperation had a way of changing a person. She could no longer stand by and watch her children suffer. They deserved food, warmth, and hope, and if the world would not give it freely, she would find a way to claim it herself. Her thoughts turned to the largest estate in the village, the one that was always filled with laughter and the smell of fresh bread. Master Khalid, the landowner, had wealth that seemed endless. His fields were green when others were brown, his children well fed while others went hungry. Amina had often walked past his estate, feeling the sting of envy but never daring to speak. Now, she realized she had no choice. Clutching her thin shawl around her shoulders, she stepped outside into the cool morning air. The path to Master Khalid's estate was long and dusty, lined with trees that provided little shade. Her children watched her go, their small eyes wide with curiosity and a glimmer of hope. She knelt briefly beside them, pressing a soft kiss to each forehead. "Stay here, and be strong," she whispered. "I will bring help." As she walked, Amina rehearsed her words in her mind. She had never spoken to the master before, never asked for anything from anyone with wealth or power. Her voice trembled slightly, but her resolve grew with every step. "I will work your fields, master," she imagined saying, "if you feed my starving children." It sounded audacious, even impossible, but it was the only chance they had. When she reached the gates of the estate, her heart pounded in her chest. The walls were tall and imposing, made of stone and wood polished by years of care. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. A servant, noticing her approach, gave her a wary glance. Amina explained her purpose simply, and soon she was led through the large courtyard to Master Khalid himself. He sat beneath a large tree, reading documents and drinking tea, his expression one of calm authority. When he looked up and saw Amina standing before him, a simple, tired woman with a determined gaze, he raised an eyebrow in surprise. She did not flinch. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying the weight of her desperation. "Master, I beg you. My children are starving. I will work in your fields, as long as you feed them." Silence followed. The master, who had never been approached this way, studied her carefully. He noticed the dirt under her fingernails, the calluses on her hands, the thinness of her frame. She was small and unassuming, yet there was a strength in her posture that could not be ignored. Many people had asked for charity before, but none had dared to offer labor in exchange. None had dared to make him consider their humanity. Amina waited patiently, aware of every second stretching into what felt like an eternity. Her mind wandered to her children, how their small hands clutched at empty bowls, how their eyes brightened only when she shared stories or made them laugh despite hunger. She imagined them growing weaker if he refused, and her chest tightened. But still, she did not break. Finally, Master Khalid spoke. His voice was deep and measured. "You would work for me and expect me to feed your children?" he asked. There was no anger in his tone, only curiosity and a trace of incredulity. Amina nodded, her eyes steady. "Yes, master. I will work from dawn until dusk. I will do whatever you ask in the fields. Please, feed my children so they do not starve." The master leaned back in his chair, thinking. He had always prided himself on his independence and wealth. Charity was something he gave sparingly, often out of pride rather than empathy. Yet now, faced with a mother's plea, he felt a stir of something unfamiliar. Perhaps it was respect for her courage. Perhaps it was the reminder of his own children and how different their lives were. Amina watched him closely, noticing the slight furrow of his brow, the way his eyes softened for a moment. She did not know if he would agree, but she could not turn back now. The future of her children depended on this conversation. She swallowed her fear and added, "Master, I do not ask for charity. I offer my labor. I will work until my hands are sore, until I can work no more. Only give my children food, and I will honor my promise." The master's silence was heavy, but Amina stood firm. Her determination radiated from her, quiet but undeniable. For the first time, he felt challenged not in wealth or power, but in morality and humanity. Here was a woman who had nothing to offer but her strength, and yet she demanded what was right for her children. It was a boldness he had never seen in any villager before. As he considered her plea, memories of his own early struggles surfaced. He remembered the days when he had nothing, when his mother had worried over every meal. The contrast was stark, and a small pang of guilt stirred in his chest. Could he turn her away? Could he let children go hungry when a simple act could save them? Amina noticed the hesitation in his eyes, the way he shifted in his chair, and she felt a flicker of hope. She did not speak further, letting her presence alone carry the weight of her plea. She had done what she could. Now, the choice was his. Hours seemed to pass as Master Khalid deliberated. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Very well," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Bring me your children tomorrow. I will provide them with food. You will work my fields as you promised." Relief flooded Amina's heart. She bowed deeply, tears welling in her eyes. But she did not cry aloud. She could hardly believe that her courage had succeeded, that her children's suffering might finally end. She thanked him quietly and left the estate, her steps lighter than they had been in weeks. As she walked back through the village, she felt the eyes of her neighbors upon her. Some whispered in surprise. Others shook their heads in disbelief. How could a single mother confront the master and succeed where others had failed? But Amina paid them no mind. Her thoughts were only of her children, and the hope that, for the first time in many months, they would have enough to eat. That night, she prepared a small meal from the last of the grains she had, sharing it with her children. Their eyes shone with gratitude and wonder, and she held them close, whispering promises of a better tomorrow. The long road ahead of her, laboring in the fields, under the harsh sun, seemed less daunting now. For the first time in a long while, hope had found its place in their home. And so, as the village slept under a blanket of stars, Amina dreamed of the day when hunger would no longer rule their lives. She did not know how hard the work would be, nor the trials she would face in the coming months, but she knew one thing for certain. She had taken the first step, and her children would live to see another day. The next morning, Amina woke before the sun, as she always did. Though today her heart carried a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. Her children had slept a little longer than usual, likely unaware of the weight their mother carried in her thoughts. She moved quietly through the small hut, preparing herself for the day ahead. There were no luxuries here, no comforts, only the bare necessities to keep her family alive. Still, she felt a spark of hope as she thought about the promise she had secured the previous day. Her walk to Master Khalid's estate felt different this time. Each step carried purpose and determination. She knew the path well, but it seemed longer today, stretching through the dusty village streets where the early morning light revealed the hardships of life etched on every face. Villagers were already stirring, some hauling water, some tending to their meager gardens, and others sitting quietly, watching the world wake up with silent resignation. When they saw her passing with a steady stride and firm gaze, some whispered in curiosity, "Is she really going to work for the master?" they murmured. Few could imagine a woman so poor and fragile daring to step into the estate's grounds. As Amina approached the gates, the familiar servant greeted her and led her through the courtyard. The smell of fresh bread and smoke from the kitchens filled the air, a stark contrast to the empty bellies of the village children. She kept her eyes lowered, remembering her place as she walked. Yet her steps did not falter. Today was the beginning of a new chapter, one that could change her family's life forever. Master Khalid awaited her in the main yard, sitting beneath the shade of a wide, ancient tree. When he saw her approach, he gestured for her to stand before him. His expression was unreadable, a mask he had perfected over years of managing his estate and the villagers. Amina took a deep breath and met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "You understand the work will be hard," Master Khalid said. His voice was calm, but there was a hint of caution. "You must rise with the sun and labor until the day is done. If you falter, the arrangement ends." Amina nodded firmly. "I understand, Master. I will work every day, from dawn to dusk, and I will do whatever is asked in the fields. My children must eat, and I will not fail them." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the master's lips. He had expected complaints, perhaps excuses, but not this steadfast determination. "Very well," he said. "The arrangement begins today. You will start in the vegetable fields. You will be given tools, and the laborers will guide you at first. Are you prepared?" Amina straightened her back, a spark of pride lighting her eyes. "I am ready, Master." Her first day in the fields began as the sun climbed higher, painting the estate in a golden glow. The air was thick with the scent of soil and the faint perfume of flowers from the master's garden. Amina was handed a hoe and shown where the furrows needed tending. The work was grueling. Every movement required strength she had not realized she possessed. Her hands blistered quickly. Her back ached from bending and lifting, and the sun beat down relentlessly. Yet she pressed on, driven by the thought of her children's faces, their hunger slowly being replaced by hope. The other laborers watched her with surprise. Many had been working these fields for years, accustomed to the routines and hardships. Yet none had approached the master with such determination. Some whispered among themselves, unsure whether to admire her courage or pity her. One older man, who had seen many come and go, muttered, "She's small, and yet she works as if fire drives her." As hours passed, Amina's exhaustion grew, but she found a rhythm in the work. She focused on each task as it came, turning the soil, planting seeds, and removing weeds. Sweat streamed down her face, mingling with the dust and dirt of the earth. Yet, she did not stop. Every time she thought of collapsing, she pictured her children, waiting at home, hungry but hopeful. That image renewed her strength and pushed her forward. Meanwhile, Master Khalid walked slowly along the edge of the fields, observing her silently. He noticed the calluses forming on her hands, the way her clothes clung to her back with sweat, and the determined set of her shoulders. He had seen women work before, but none with such quiet intensity. It was not just labor. It was a testament to love, courage, and survival. For the first time, he felt the weight of the power he wielded. Here was a woman who had nothing, willing to endure hardship to secure life for her children. And yet, he realized, she had approached him not with a demand, but with a fair offer. Her labor in exchange for sustenance. There was dignity in that, a humanity that money could not measure. He found himself thinking of his own children, who had never known hunger, and a sense of responsibility stirred in him that he had not felt before. As the days turned into weeks, Amina's routine became both grueling and steady. She rose before the sun, walked the long path to the estate, and worked tirelessly until her muscles screamed in protest. Yet with every seed planted, every weed removed, her heart felt lighter because her children were no longer starving. Master Khalid kept his promise, and the sight of the children gaining strength brought Amina a happiness she had not felt in years. The villagers began to take notice of the arrangement. Some were skeptical, thinking the master might withdraw his promise at any moment. Others admired Amina's courage and perseverance. Slowly, whispers of respect began to circulate through the village. Mothers spoke of her determination. Fathers nodded at her bravery. And even the children watched her with awe. She had become a symbol not only of survival but of courage in the face of despair. Even in the fields, there were moments of small joy. Amina would pause to watch the birds flutter across the sky, or the way sunlight caught the leaves of a tree. She spoke softly to herself, telling stories to the seeds she planted, imagining them growing strong and providing food for her children. These small rituals kept her spirits alive amidst the relentless labor. Master Khalid, too, began to change. He walked through the fields more often, sometimes offering guidance, other times merely observing. He noticed how other laborers began to work more diligently in her presence, inspired by her example. The estate, once a place of simple routine, became a place where life, labor, and human connection intersected in subtle ways. At home, Amina's children felt the difference immediately. The food provided was enough to nourish them, and the fear of hunger began to fade. Their laughter, once rare, returned to the small hut. Amina cherished these moments, holding her children close at night and telling them that better days were coming. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but hope was a powerful companion, and it gave her strength to face each dawn with renewed determination. Yet not all moments were easy. There were days when the sun blazed too hot, when blisters formed and muscles ached so much that her hands trembled. On such days, she leaned on her determination and the thought of her children. She reminded herself that the work, though hard, was temporary in comparison to the lifelong hunger she sought to prevent. The more she labored, the more her spirit hardened against despair, and the more Master Khalid began to see the depth of her courage. As weeks passed, the initial awkwardness between Amina and the master softened into a quiet understanding. He rarely spoke much to her, but his approval was evident in the care with which the tools were provided, the food delivered to her children, and the occasional nod of recognition in the fields. Amina, in turn, maintained her focus on work, never asking for more than promised, never complaining, and always carrying herself with dignity. Through this exchange, a bond began to form, not of friendship, but of mutual respect. Master Khalid, who had always measured life in wealth and efficiency, began to appreciate the value of courage, determination, and the unspoken strength of a mother's love. Amina, who had never imagined the world beyond her village, found empowerment in her ability to act, to negotiate, and to secure her children's survival. The village slowly began to shift as well. Neighbors began to view the master differently, realizing that his wealth could be a source of support, not merely of separation. Children played a little more freely, parents spoke with a little more hope, and Amina's example planted seeds of courage in hearts that had long been quieted by despair. Even at the end of long, exhausting days, Amina felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Though her body ached and her hands were raw, she knew that every movement was a step toward a future where her children would not know the pangs of hunger. The bargain she had struck, born out of desperation and courage, was transforming not only her family but the very environment around her. In the quiet evenings, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Amina would sit on the steps of her hut, watching her children play. She thought of the day she had walked into Master Khalid's estate, trembling yet determined, and marveled at the path her courage had created. It had been a simple request, labor in exchange for sustenance, but it had grown into something much more, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the quiet power of a mother's love. And so, life in the village began to change. Amina continued to work tirelessly, her hands and back aching, but her spirit stronger than ever. Her children thrived, Master Khalid's perspective shifted, and the villagers learned a lesson they would not soon forget. That courage and determination could bridge gaps of wealth, power, and despair. The story of a single mother who dared to ask for help in a dignified way was quietly reshaping the world around her, one day at a time. Days turned into weeks, and Amina's life settled into a relentless rhythm of work, hope, and perseverance. Every morning, she rose before the sun, the first light of dawn brushing against the edges of the village. Her children, now slightly stronger thanks to the food Master Khalid provided, still slept in the small hut, dreaming of something more than empty stomachs. She kissed each of them gently before stepping out into the cool morning air, knowing the hours ahead would test her strength and endurance like never before. The fields were vast, stretching beyond the horizon, filled with furrows that needed tending, seeds that required planting, and weeds that threatened to overtake the fragile crops. At first, the work had been new and intimidating, but now, though the tasks remained grueling, Amina had found a rhythm. She could sense when a plant needed more attention, when the soil required turning, and when the weeds could be uprooted quickly before they choked the young shoots. Her body ached constantly, her hands blistered and raw. But each ache was a reminder that she was fighting for something greater than herself. The sun climbed high in the sky, beating down mercilessly on the earth and anyone working beneath it. Sweat ran down Amina's face, mixed with the dirt of the soil, but she never faltered. Occasionally, she would pause for a brief drink of water, wiping her brow before bending back into the work. Villagers passing nearby often stopped to watch her, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others silently admiring her courage. She had become a symbol of endurance in a village where despair had long overshadowed hope. Master Khalid observed her from a distance, sometimes walking among the rows of crops, other times sitting beneath the shade of a tree, watching in quiet contemplation. At first, he had viewed her determination with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Few had dared to approach him in such a way, offering labor in exchange for sustenance, and even fewer had maintained their commitment day after day. He noticed her small frame working tirelessly under the sun, her back bent over the soil, and the fierce concentration in her eyes. It was a sight that stirred something deep within him, an unfamiliar respect and, perhaps, a sense of guilt for having wealth when others struggled so greatly. Her children, now receiving regular meals, began to show remarkable change. Their cheeks grew fuller, their eyes brighter, and their laughter returned, faint but present. This transformation, small as it was, gave Amina the courage to face each day's labor with renewed strength. She knew that every seed she planted, every weed she pulled, was not just work, it was life being returned to her family. Each evening, when she returned to her hut, she found joy in watching her children eat their fill, even if the rest of the village still struggled to make ends meet. The physical toll of the work was immense. Her hands were constantly blistered, her back screamed with soreness, and her legs felt like lead by the end of each day. On some days, the sun was so hot that the sweat poured from her in rivers, soaking her clothes and leaving her exhausted. Yet she endured, driven by a force far greater than physical strength, the love for her children. Hunger was no longer the only motivator. Pride and determination fueled her movements, and the thought of giving up was never an option. Despite her exhaustion, there were moments of quiet reflection that offered brief solace. Sometimes, as she paused to drink from a small water jug, she would look at the sky, noticing the birds flying freely above, or the clouds slowly drifting across the horizon. She would tell stories to herself, imagining the seeds she planted growing into healthy crops that would provide not just for her children, but for the entire village. These small acts of imagination became a source of strength, a mental escape from the harshness of daily toil. Master Khalid's perspective began to shift gradually. He had always measured life in terms of wealth, land, and efficiency, yet watching Amina labor tirelessly for the sake of her children introduced a new dimension to his understanding. He began to see the village not as a collection of people dependent on his charity, but as human beings with courage, resilience, and dignity. Her determination was a lesson in humility. forcing him to confront the gap between his comfort and the struggles that surrounded him. The other laborers, initially indifferent, started to observe Amina's dedication with admiration. Some whispered about her strength. Others quietly followed her example, working harder in the fields than they had before. She did not speak much to them, focusing on her tasks. Yet her presence alone inspired a change in attitude. They began to treat the work with more care, understanding that their efforts mattered not just for the master's wealth but for the well-being of families depending on them. The work was not without setbacks. There were days when sudden rainstorms threatened the young crops, when pests destroyed part of the harvest, or when Amina herself fell ill from overexertion. On these days, her resolve was tested to its limits. Her body ached more than ever. Her hands were raw, and her spirit wavered. But she reminded herself constantly of why she endured. Her children's hunger was the enemy she refused to surrender to, and each trial strengthened her commitment to fight against it. Through these trials, small gestures of kindness began to emerge. Master Khalid occasionally brought her extra water or food, gestures that he had never thought necessary before. He began to converse with her briefly, asking about her family, her thoughts on the crops, or her strategies for keeping the fields productive. These exchanges were rare but meaningful, a recognition of her humanity and the extraordinary courage she displayed daily. Amina's life outside the fields remained shaped by her labor. Evenings were spent nurturing her children, teaching them small lessons about life, sharing stories, and celebrating minor successes, like a new sprout appearing in her home garden. These moments, though brief, were cherished. They reinforced the purpose behind her suffering and reminded her that life could hold beauty even amid hardship. As months passed, the transformation in her children became more pronounced. Their energy returned. Their smiles became frequent, and their health steadily improved. Amina's pride in them was matched only by the quiet satisfaction she felt in herself. She had proven, through determination and love, that survival was possible even in the harshest circumstances. The master, observing this change, began to understand that his role was not merely as a provider of food, but as a participant in a moral duty to his community. The villagers' perception of Amina also shifted. Initially seen as desperate and fragile, she was now admired as a woman of courage, resilience, and determination. Mothers told their children stories of her perseverance. Fathers nodded with quiet respect, and children looked up to her as a symbol of strength. She had become more than a mother, struggling to feed her family. She had become a living example of hope, proving that courage and dignity could overcome despair. Master Khalid's own household felt subtle changes. His children observed Amina's dedication and began to ask questions about the world outside their estate. They saw the contrast between their comfortable lives and the struggles faced by the village children, instilling early lessons in empathy and understanding. These small shifts in perspective were part of a larger transformation within the estate, one that extended beyond labor or food and into the realms of humanity and compassion. Even on the most exhausting days, Amina found moments of reflection that strengthened her resolve. She would pause during breaks, feeling the soil between her fingers, imagining the future harvests, and thinking of the life her children would one day lead. These mental exercises gave her hope, helped her endure, and reminded her that her labor had meaning far beyond the immediate pain or fatigue. Over time, the relationship between Amina and Master Khalid deepened, though it remained unspoken and understated. It was not friendship in the traditional sense, but a mutual understanding forged through shared human experience. She recognized in him the potential for kindness and justice, while he recognized in her the extraordinary power of determination and love. Each day of labor, each seed planted, became a bridge between their worlds, connecting wealth and poverty, power and vulnerability, in a subtle but profound way. The village itself began to reflect these changes. Inspired by Amina's example, others started to help one another more actively. Some shared what little they had, others offered labor in communal projects, and slowly, a sense of solidarity emerged. The ripple effect of one mother's courage was becoming evident, proving that a single act of bravery and dignity could influence an entire community. As the sun set each evening, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Amina returned to her children, exhausted but fulfilled. She watched them play, listened to their laughter, and felt the weight of her sacrifices lighten in their happiness. The hardships of the day were many, but the knowledge that her children were no longer starving made each struggle worthwhile. Even as fatigue pulled at her body, she remained vigilant. She knew that life's challenges were ongoing, that the seasons could bring unexpected hardships, and that her work was far from over. Yet, through every trial, every blister, every aching muscle, she discovered a strength within herself she had never known. The strength of a mother, driven by love and necessity, capable of changing not just her own family's fate but the lives of those around her. Amina had started her journey desperate and uncertain, but she had become resilient and purposeful. Each day, each drop of sweat, and each aching limb were proof of her courage. Her children thrived. Master Khalid began to see the humanity he had long overlooked, and the village slowly started to awaken to hope and solidarity. The trials had been harsh, but they had forged a path for change, for understanding, and for the quiet triumph of determination and love over despair. The seasons shifted slowly over the village, and with each passing day, the fruits of Amina's labor became more visible. The fields she had tended, once barren and cracked, now thrived with healthy crops. Green shoots stretched toward the sun, and the soil, once dry and lifeless, began to hum with growth and life. Amina walked through the rows of vegetables and grains, her hands running lightly over the leaves, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her fingers. She thought of her children, now strong and healthy, and a quiet pride warmed her tired body. Her struggle had not been in vain. Master Khalid observed the transformation with a sense of wonder. The estate, long known for its wealth and order, had become a place of life and connection. Watching Amina work had changed his perspective in ways he had never anticipated. He began to see that wealth, while valuable, was not the measure of a person's worth. Courage, determination, and selfless love were qualities far more powerful. Each day, he found himself reflecting on the courage it took for a single mother to face him, a man of power, with such honesty and resolve. Amina continued her daily routine without complaint. She rose before dawn, worked tirelessly in the fields, and returned home to care for her children. Yet now, there was a lightness in her steps, a sense of purpose fulfilled. Her children thrived, their laughter filling the small hut in a way that had once been unimaginable. Nights that were once filled with fear and worry now echoed with playful giggles and stories shared between mother and children. The hunger that had once dominated their lives was gradually replaced with hope and security. The villagers noticed the changes as well. Word of Amina's courage and determination spread quickly, becoming a story that inspired those who had long felt powerless. Mothers spoke of her strength, fathers nodded in respect, and children watched her as a role model. She became more than a symbol of survival. She became a living example of the power of action, dignity, and perseverance. People began to offer help to one another more willingly, and the sense of despair that had once hung over the village began to lift. Master Khalid took steps to extend his support beyond Amina and her family. He recognized that the struggles of one family reflected the hardships faced by the entire community. Slowly, he introduced programs to help other families, providing food and work in a fair and dignified manner. Villagers who had once viewed him as distant and indifferent now saw the human side of the man who had wealth but was willing to act with compassion. These changes were not immediate, but the seeds of understanding and generosity were planted, nurtured by the example of one courageous mother. Amina's work in the fields continued, but it evolved as well. She began to teach younger women in the village how to tend to crops, how to care for the soil, and how to plant seeds that would yield the best harvest. Her knowledge, once confined to survival, became a source of empowerment for others. The lessons she shared were simple but profound. Determination, careful work, and love for one's family could overcome even the harshest circumstances. Her relationship with Master Khalid deepened in subtle ways. While they never became friends in the conventional sense, a mutual respect grew between them. He consulted her about the crops, valued her opinions, and occasionally offered guidance. She learned from him too, not only about farming techniques, but also about responsibility, fairness, and leadership. Their interactions were marked by a quiet understanding, a shared recognition of the struggles and triumphs that each had witnessed. Amina's children flourished in this environment. They were healthy, curious, and filled with the energy that comes from being properly nourished. She watched them explore the fields, laugh with other children, and dream of futures that were no longer limited by hunger. Each day, she reminded herself that her efforts were shaping more than just the present. They were building a foundation for their future. The sacrifices she had made were transforming into opportunities for growth, learning, and hope. The villagers gradually adopted similar practices, inspired by what they saw in Amina. Small communal gardens were planted, families shared resources, and neighbors supported one another. The village, once dominated by fear and scarcity, began to thrive with collaboration and mutual care. Amina's courage had sparked a quiet revolution of humanity, proving that a single act of determination could ripple outward to create meaningful change. Even in moments of personal reflection, Amina found fulfillment. She remembered the day she had approached Master Khalid, her heart pounding with fear yet filled with resolve. She had been a simple woman, facing a man of power with nothing but her dignity and determination. Now, months later, she stood in fields that were alive with growth, her children healthy and laughing, and a village that had begun to awaken to hope. The journey had been arduous, filled with exhaustion, pain, and doubt, but the rewards were profound. Master Khalid, too, reflected on the transformation he had witnessed. He realized that his wealth and power were meaningless if not used to nurture and protect life. Amina's example had taught him humility, empathy, and the importance of community. He began to take a more active role in the village, not as a ruler or benefactor, but as a partner in shared responsibility. His decisions became guided not only by business or profit, but by the well-being of those who lived around him. As the harvest season arrived, the fruits of labor were clear for all to see. Fields that had been barren now overflowed with vegetables, grains, and fruits. Amina's careful attention, the guidance of Master Khalid, and the cooperation of the villagers had turned the estate and surrounding lands into a source of abundance. Families were fed, children were healthy, and the village had begun to heal from the scars of poverty and hunger. Amina's sacrifices were recognized in subtle but meaningful ways. She was invited to speak to other women in the village, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to take active roles in their families and communities. Her story became a lesson in courage, perseverance, and the quiet power of love. It was proof that even the smallest voice, when driven by necessity and dignity, could challenge the norms and bring about transformation. Life did not become perfect overnight. There were still challenges, storms that threatened the crops, occasional illnesses, and the ever-present demands of hard labor. Yet, Amina had grown stronger, more resilient, and more capable of facing difficulties. She no longer saw obstacles as insurmountable, but as challenges to overcome with determination and care. The lessons she had learned, hard-won through sweat and struggle, became tools for building a better life for her children and the entire village. As years passed, the village continued to thrive. Master Khalid maintained his support, fostering a culture of fairness and compassion. Families were healthier, the soil was fertile, and the community was stronger. Amina's children grew into capable young individuals, confident in their abilities and inspired by their mother's courage. The lessons of hard work, determination, and the importance of helping one another were embedded in their upbringing, ensuring that her legacy would endure beyond her lifetime. Amina herself became a respected figure in the village. She was not wealthy, nor did she seek recognition, but her impact was undeniable. Villagers came to her for guidance, support, and advice. She offered these with the same humility and grace that had guided her through her most difficult days. Her life became a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of standing up for one's family, and the ability of a single person to inspire change in others. Even Master Khalid felt the enduring influence of her courage. He had learned that wealth alone was not enough, that human connection, empathy, and the willingness to act for the benefit of others were far more valuable. The estate, once a symbol of power and detachment, became a place of cooperation, respect, and life-giving work. Amina's courage had transformed not only her own life but the lives of those around her, including the master himself. In the quiet moments, when the sun dipped low in the sky and painted the horizon with hues of gold and pink, Amina often stood in the fields, looking at the thriving crops and the smiling faces of her children. She remembered the fear she had felt when approaching the master, the uncertainty of whether her plea would be heard, and the exhaustion of the early days of labor. And yet, in that moment, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment and peace. Her courage, determination, and love had brought about change, not just for her family, but for an entire village. Amina's story became a legend in the village, not because of wealth or fame, but because it embodied the enduring power of hope, courage, and selfless love. Parents told their children about the mother who dared to speak boldly to the master, the woman who worked tirelessly for the sake of her children, and the simple truth that determination and dignity could overcome even the harshest circumstances. Her legacy was woven into the fabric of the community, a reminder that one person's actions could ignite transformation and inspire generations. And so, life in the village continued, richer in hope and human connection. Amina's children grew strong. The crops flourished, and the villagers learned that courage, compassion, and hard work could reshape their world. The story of a single mother, who had once walked to the master with nothing but determination, became an enduring testament to the power of love, resilience, and the quiet but profound impact one individual can have on the lives of many.